Now it's time to put the cam bearings in. This is normally an easy job. Shouldn't be too difficult. All you have to do is hammer these in with a cam bearing installation tool. All you really have to worry about is lining up the oil hole with the hole. Make sure you get it started good, and that's really all there's supposed to be to this job. The problem is sometimes you install the cam bearings and then the cam won't go in. So I think first we should go over what to do if you have put in the cam bearings and the cam won't go in. And after we go over that, I think we should talk about what can we do to be more successful at putting in cam bearings and the cam fitting. But before we get started with that, because we're focused on the front of the block right now, I want to go over a few things. First of all, these holes for the dowel pins were the engineering spec on these is 245 because these are interference fit, and they're 246, but these holes weren't big enough. They were under 244, so naturally it was very hard to hammer them in. It's not going to be pleasant. Same way with the ones on the deck, because a CNC machine only has one tool to do that, and so if one is bad, they're most all going to be bad. Another thing I want to go over is you probably won't be running a belt drive, but if you wanted to in the future, you will find that you can't because you didn't do a little grinding here to relieve for a belt drive in the future if you should decide to run one. If you can, you're going to be here with a die grinder anyway, doing some deburring, so it would be nice if you would bum a front cover from somebody for a belt drive and you try to fit it, and then you'll see where it's going to be hitting here, and you can grind that little part out and get it where it'll fit easily, flush without a gasket, and then you'll be ready in case you ever go to a gear drive. Maybe somebody give you a bunch of money for Christmas or something, and you can get a belt drive because everybody thinks they're chic, you know what I mean? I've never installed one of these, so I can't help you. This boss here sticks out quite a bit, which is never a problem in a normal application. But if you try to install a gear drive, that boss is going to interfere with this part of the gear drive. So it's pretty easy. All you have to do is flatten the front of this with your die grinder. Just flatten it out a little bit. You can come back, you're going to stick a plug in here later, but you can come back to right there. It's not going to hurt anything. There's nothing but cast iron. Just flatten that out a little bit. Then if someday you get some crazy idea to run a gear drive like them old geezers, you'll be able to. But these things you can't do after the fact. I mean, imagine if you wanted to put a belt drive on something in the car, and you can't go grinding and putting all that stuff in your engine. It's best to relieve it now. They did a good job deburring that. They did pretty nice, but there'll be things you want to touch up on your block, You don't have to, but people generally do that just for fun. You've probably got a little die grinder and a carbide burr anyway. Okay, so on your cam bearings, as you know, there's 5 cam bearings, and they're all different sizes. So there'll be 5 different part numbers. These are clevides, which is supposed to be the good stuff. You usually start at the back for obvious reasons, because you're usually putting this on an engine stand, and So you've hammered the cam bearings in, and the cam doesn't want to go in. What happened? Well, what happened is you hammered too hard, and you mushroomed this, and now you've got a mess. You're going to have to get a bearing knife, deburring knife, or we all know you have one of these, the flat side of that screwdriver. You're going to have to get in here with your finger and feel all those lobes, all the bearings, and find out where it is. Now when you're trying to stick the cam in, it'll leave a mark there. If you turn it back and forth, you can, and that'll help you see it too. So feel that with your finger, and then just take your little screwdriver and scrape that ridge off where you mushroomed it in with that tool. And eventually, hopefully the cam will go in. If after 4 hours of you working and test fitting the cam in and out and driving yourself totally crazy and you don't know what to do, you can cheat. I don't want to say where I learned this trick or why I have this in my hand, but you can take an old cam and your whizzer wheel and just grind a little slot in each journal on the cam. Now you have to take the engine off, the block off the stand, stand it on its tail, stick the cam in, oil it up good, oil the bearings up good, and oil the journals up good here. Then you'll need something, you'll have to rig up a way where you can hook a drill to your cam, and then you can drill down into the block with this tool you made. When you pull it back out, your cam bearings will be perfect and life will be good. When you get done, you can get some Scotch-Brite and rub in there on that cam bearing, and it'll look perfect, and then your mama won't know that you totally screwed up the cam bearings when you hammered them in. Okay, so now let's put in the first cam bearing. Actually, you know, one thing you can do, if you want to, normally these cam bearing bores are going to be right. If you want to, you can mic the bores and see what you got. This front bearing is supposed to be 2.1295 up to 2.1305. They give you a thou to work with, or for them to work with, should I say, because they're machining the block. And they usually hit it pretty good. This one is 30 with 2/10, and the spec is 30 with 5/10, and you want to be closer to the high side because you know that they'll slide in easier if they're closer to the high side. So I mic'd all of these, and we're all in spec. But having said that, the rear is at the low spec limit, and you know what that means. It's going to be tight going in. So what can we do to help that? Well, you should oil, at least I think it's going to be easier if you oil the bores before you try to slide the cam bearing in. And you should put a little oil on the cam bearing to help it. Now I know you can't do this if you're in California because putting oil on, you know what I mean, it causes cancer and you're going to die and birth defects and all that. But in Arkansas, you know, we can do what we want, and then you can wipe your finger on your pants in Arkansas. I mean, you know what I mean. We're just a bunch of hillbillies anyway. So some people line this the hole up with this kind of to help you guide your way in. You know, it has to be perfectly straight going in, or the hole's not going to line up. Because once you get started, you can't turn it after the fact. You're going to have to get it lined up good. I believe that to be straight. Straight up, and I think that we'll be happy when we get done. Boy, doesn't that feel tight? Oh, wow. I probably want to check this and make sure it's still tight. See, that loosened up a little bit. That's bad. You don't want your tool getting loose on you. But this is taking an extraordinary amount of hammering. When you do this, you feel like you're setting yourself up for failure. These should have knocked in with half of these amount of hits. Take a flashlight and see when you get close. I couldn't see good, so I want to back it out. Well, I think that's perfect. Yeah, we're okay. Now, will the cam go in? So, normally people just hammer all 5 in and everything's fine. But this sounds kind of stupid to do it this way. But if you do it one at a time, now you know which one you hurt. When you put all 5 of them in, and now you don't know where you're supposed to be looking for the problem. But if you do them one at a time, I know that sounds childish, but if you do them one at a time, by the way, use an old cam for this because you're going to beat the lobes up going in and out. Don't use your new cam. But if we do them one at a time, then we know where to look for the problem. It's a nightmare when you hammer all 5 of them in there and then you don't know where the problem is. You're trying to relieve a bearing. Look at that. Wow. Hey, man, I'm happy. Life is good. Okay, I will put the rest of these cam bearings in and we'll go on to the next step. Okay, I'm going to have to come clean with you people. The first time I tried to install the rear cam bearing, the cam wouldn't go in. Of course, I'm used to that. But so I felt around in there, and you could feel it was pretty bad. I don't know if you can see it good, but look at what I did to that thing. Smashed it in terrible. And that it's not a big deal. You just take your little bearing knife or screwdriver or deburring knife, and you get in there and you scrape that out until it's flat. You have to kind of work it a little bit and keep feeling of it till you think you've got it all. And it'll be fine when you get done. But I got mad and just put a new one in instead. I figured if I'm going to spend over $20,000 on this, that I'll just put in a new bearing. But the question really is, what happened? Well, I think what happened was, because of the hole being at minimum, and I had to do all that hammering, I believe the tool got loose. And as this tool, you can see it has very little margin for error here. As this gets smaller, it can try to go up in the bearing. And so I guess the moral of the story is, when you're having to hammer excessively to get the bearing in, be sure to check it and make sure that it stays tight. But the next time, the bearing went in fine, and everybody's happy, and hopefully the rest will go back good too. Since we have the main caps off, it'd be a good time to check our crankshaft for straightness, which is pretty simple. All you have to do is put a upper main bearing in number 1 and number 5, and then set you up a magnetic base dial indicator like this on the number 3 main bearing, and rotate it and see how we look. And almost nothing, but less than a thou. So we're totally happy with that. Next we need to we want to look at for interference in between the bearing and that radius there. The stock crank didn't have a radius to hit, so that would be a surface there that would be away from you. It wouldn't matter. But when you have these big radius crankshafts, which is the good stuff that we have nowadays, you have to make sure that your main bearing isn't going to hit right there, which wouldn't have mattered with a stock crank, but does matter with a full radius. The easiest way out on something like this, and you still want to check, but you want to use a narrowed bearing. Now, they're calling these extra chamfer bearings, but trust but verify. You're going to have to take a look in here and see. Now this is what I'm talking about on this clearance between this bearing and this radius in the crankshaft. This is the number 5 main bearing. And these are narrowed bearings and they're supposed to clear, but you have to check this stuff. If you tighten your main caps and that crankshaft is harder to turn, that's going to be a bad sign. But you need to get in here really, really good and check your clearance. Okay, while we're working on the crankshaft, while we have it out here and working on some bearings, I thought we would do a preliminary check on the thrust clearance. First, while I had the crankshaft out, I took the thrust bearing and set it in here, and it had a little wiggle. That's fine. A thrust spec is only 4 to 7 thousandths, so you don't have to have much to please everybody. I put the upper thrust bearing in here, and I can see we got some daylight right here. Everything's fine. So normally you would just put a dial indicator on the end of the crankshaft and tap it back and forth and check your thrust clearance. But when I set the crankshaft in, guess what? The crankshaft doesn't spin. So then I tapped it to see about any thrust clearance. Guess what? See that gap? That right there? When I hammer on it, it's not closing up. So what's going on here? I checked this, and we don't have this is not interfering with the radius. And this is in the middle. You know, it's not interfering with the radius, and this is not interfering with the radius. Got plenty of clearance right here. So where's the problem? Well, the problem is right back what we were looking at a while ago, that we didn't know if there was enough clearance there, and now we know that there's not. Right there, that is jammed. That's why I can't tap it back, even though I can see daylight in there. It won't tap back. Now I realize that these bearings say that they are clearanced for a radius, and they are. When you look at them, there's a radius there. They are clearance somewhat, but not enough. And while we were talking about bearings the other day, and I should have said this then, it doesn't matter what kind of bearing you want. You can spend a week studying bearings and buy what you think is the best bearing in the world, but it doesn't matter. The block is going to decide what bearing it wants. If you pick your bearings, when you put them in, you're going to find out that the clearance is either too little or not enough or too much, and that particular bearing doesn't have an undersize or an oversize, and you're going to have to change to a different bearing. It's not easy. When you're building stroker motors, everything's different. You have the radius to get involved with, and it's not like the old days where you just go down to Napa and get some bearings for a street Hemi and throw them in there and drive away. It's not the world we live in today. So I will I have some bearings over there that I got from Ray Barton, and they're going to work. Ray has built hundreds and hundreds of these stroker motors. He doesn't have to wonder which bearing to use. He's been down this road before. So I'll put some of his bearings in it, and everything's going to be absolutely wonderful. And in the next episode, we'll go over that. And I think we'll do some work on the rods, check out the big end, small end, and get something going there. So now I'll tear all this down and try new bearings, and we'll get there. I didn't say it was going to be easy.